answering the top 50 interview questions for a Scrum Master in 2023.
Hi folks, welcome back to the Everyday Agile YouTube channel with me, Jack Hughes. If you're an organisation looking to experiment with agile ways of working, it's probably a good idea to know where to start. What is agile methodology? Agile with a capital A was based on 4 values, 12 principles.
We've got to where we are by having those values and principles, practices that we've learned over time in place.
Hi everyone, Jack here from Everyday Agile, and in this video I'm going to be answering the top 50 Scrum Master interview questions. Well, it's actually 62, but 50 sounds better, so there we are. I've taken these questions from simplylearn.com, which I'll put in the description. Keep in mind that these are not my questions, so if you don't agree with the terminology, don't come after me, email them instead. Now, I haven't got all day, so I'm going to be going for quick fire answers, which means it could go either way. Let's get on with it. What is Scrum? Scrum is a framework that helps teams develop and sustain complex products. Good start. Define the roles in Scrum. Well, actually, if I wanted to put my anorak on, I would say these are accountabilities. The 3 accountabilities in Scrum are the product owner, Scrum Master, and developer or developers. What are the responsibilities of a Scrum team? Well, the Scrum team is responsible for all product-related activities, whether that be speaking to the customers, prioritizing something called the product backlog, dealing with technical debt, dealing with defects in the product, actually building the product. Everything related to that specific product is the Scrum team's responsibility as that cohesive unit of people. What is the difference between Agile and Scrum? Well, Agile is made up of 4 values and 12 principles laid out in the manifesto for Agile software development. It was a combination of ideas from 17 people, and it came about in 2001. Whereas Scrum is a framework to help solve complex problems. It's a framework that sits underneath the Agile umbrella, if you like. What are the artifacts of the Scrum process? Product backlog, sprint backlog, increment. Done and dusted. How are the product and sprint backlog different from one another? Well, think of the product backlog as the big list of things to do, anything that is going to contribute, enhance, build on top of the current product, the whole big list. The sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog that the team are going to concentrate on for that specific period of time. That period of time could be anything from 1 to 4 weeks. Who is a Scrum Master and what does he or she do? Well, the Scrum Master could be anyone really, but they are responsible for ensuring that Scrum is adhered to as per the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide. What happens in the daily stand-up questions? Well, I don't like your question, mate. It's called the Daily Scrum, not a stand-up. Next question, please. What is Scrumban? Well, I think you mean there is Scrum with Kanban, which is where we take advantage and utilize some of the Kanban principles, such as limiting work in progress, and apply them to our Scrum practices. What is Sprint Zero and Spike? It's literally worded like that. If we're talking about Scrum Utopia, and Sprint Zero is not a thing. In fact, some people would argue it's a bit of a red flag. It's not very good, basically. And what is a spike? Well, to me, it could be something that's in the product backlog that needs a bit more investigation, a bit of research, if you like. We've never built something on AWS before. Let's time box a day to see what that process would be like. It may enhance the product, or we may make a decision not to do it. What is user story mapping? Great question. Now, in my opinion, user story mapping is a great tool for any team, not just the Scrum team, to help turn that very vertical product backlog and help articulate what the user journey is, which can then help with prioritization and ultimately help answer the question of what is coming next, or what is potentially coming next. What happens during a sprint retrospective? Now think of the sprint retro as an inward-facing event where we're holding up the mirror to ourselves as a team, people, processes, behaviors, anti-patterns, etc. And it may be the event where we look at our definition of done and see if it's still fit for purpose and if it needs to change. What is empirical process control in Scrum? Basically making decisions based on evidence, stuff we can touch, feel, see, interact with, and making decisions based on that. What are the drawbacks to using Scrum? Well, there aren't any. Obviously, it's perfect. If only that was the case. There are plenty of drawbacks, especially if leaders within an organization don't know what they're signing up for, if they've just heard of this Scrum thing and they think they should do it because everyone else is doing it. It really takes a lot of investment. Depending on your type of organization, if you do a bit of digging, the Scrum framework might not be a good fit because of the work you do, and that is okay. Just because Scrum can be applied to anything doesn't mean it should. How can Discord be dealt with within the Scrum team? Get rid of them all, start again, get some better people in. Obviously joking. You could use a few techniques, 5 whys, step into facilitation mode, run some workshops. You could look back on your sprint retro items to see if they're not being carried out, and that's obviously going to cause some frustration. As a Scrum Master, step back, take that helicopter view of the team and ask them what they need. What are the key skills of a Scrum Master? Being able to make a good cup of tea, get the donuts in on a Friday, and as long as you're walking around with a notebook looking busy, you should be okay. What is a user story? A user story is telling the story from the user's point of view. It's a mixture between a desire and a requirement. I've heard other people call it a desirement. It's a short, sharp job to be done, if you like. As a user, I want to do a specific thing so that I can achieve X, Y, or Z. How are user stories, epics, and tasks different? Probably need a whiteboard for this one, but if we're talking about it from a purely hierarchical point of view, an epic is just a big, chunky user story that needs to be broken down into sub-items, if you like. So if you imagine a login to an application as an epic, the user story could be, as a user, I want to log in using Face ID. Second user story, as a user, I want to be able to log in with my username and password. Epic equals big user story. User story means specific problems that need to be solved. A task could be, I need to build a database. Not everything is a user story and not everything needs to be a task. What is a sprint? A sprint is a period of time laid out in the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, meaning a sprint can be no more than 1 calendar month. So you can have 1, 2, 3, or 4 week sprints. It's just a time-boxed period of time where work will get done. What is velocity? How fast you can burn through the backlog. What are the responsibilities of a product owner? Product owner is responsible for maximizing the value that the developers produce. What is a burn up and burn down chart? Waste of time, move on. How is estimation done in a Scrum project? However you want. Hashtag no estimates. Utilize better metrics like lead time, cycle time, throughput. Don't use estimates as contracts. Software engineering is very difficult. Just don't bother, mate. Are you achieving sprint goals? Are you providing better value to your consumers? Use user story mapping. Yeah, don't worry too much about it. I'm starting to think I wouldn't get a job in this place. But there we are. What are some risks in Scrum? How are they handled? Risks in Scrum, people not knowing what they're talking about, people not knowing what the framework is. Yeah, it's a bit of a rubbish question, to be honest. How are risks handled? Through the backlog. How does a Scrum Master track sprint progress? Well, it's up to the developers to monitor their own progress. I imagine most Scrum Masters are there to help and keep an eye on things, but if this is talking about moving tickets and updating burn down charts, then if that's the tool that the team's decided to use, yeah, do it themselves. How to deal with scope creep. Well, adding things to the backlog is not really scope creep. That sounds like very project orientated to me and not product development. I don't think I want to work in this place anymore. What are MVP and MMP? Minimum viable product, minimum marketable product. What does DOD mean? Definition of done. How can a Scrum Master be a servant leader? Well, if we're going by the book, it's true leader in the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide. That doesn't mean servant leadership just disappears. To answer this question specifically, it depends which stance that Scrum Master needs to be in. Do they need to be in facilitator, mentoring, training, or coaching mode? Allowing the team to make the decisions and being there to support them if needed. Practicing what they preach, doing what they say they're going to do, and constantly being that champion for agility and for a positive culture in the organization. How can you coordinate between multiple teams? Now, if we're talking about scaling Scrum specifically, sticking to the rule of one will really help. So one product owner, one product backlog, and one product, meaning there should only be one person, if you like, making those decisions, which will help coordinate across multiple teams working on the same product. What are the Scrum values? FROCC. Focus, respect, openness, courage, and commitment. Next question. How would you handle conflict within a team? Take them outside, give them some gloves, let them have a fight, shake hands at the end, get the beers in. How would you deal with a difficult stakeholder? Make the product owner aware, make sure it doesn't impact the team in a negative way. Make sure you're being honest with them in terms of progress. It's not up to you to manage their expectations. You're not a babysitter. Be honest with them, give them the correct information, and slope it to the product owner. What are the 3 pillars of Scrum? Transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Moving on. Explain user story structure with an example. As a banking app user, I want to log into my current account so I can check my balance. How can you ensure that user stories meet the requirements? Having a strong definition of done, having strong acceptance criteria, making sure the whole team is involved in fleshing out that particular user story. What are the 5 steps of risk management? Not a clue. Absolutely no idea. I'm not going to cheat. Just don't know it. Don't know. What do you mean by time boxing in Scrum? When can a sprint be cancelled and by whom? I didn't mention time boxing. It's your question. Time boxing just means, we have the time box for a sprint retrospective is 3 hours for a 1 month sprint. That doesn't mean we have to use all of that time, but it shouldn't go beyond that time. Helps us make decisions quicker, prevents paralysis by analysis. This is a double header. Actually, it's a triple header. It's a question within a question within a question. When can a sprint be cancelled? When the sprint goal can no longer be achieved, and by whom? The product owner. What do you understand about scope creep? How can scope creep be managed? This is the second time you've mentioned scope creep. It's just different things being added to the product backlog. How can you manage it? Make sure the product owner is talking to stakeholders, customers, help them, coach them, be there for them. Make sure the team is protected as well, with no one swinging their authority around forcing the team to do something. When should a Scrum Master not act as a facilitator? Oh, that's a naughty question. Depends on the situation, really, depending on where the team are. If they're just starting, then you're probably going to be a bit more hands-on in terms of facilitation. For the daily Scrum, for example, the Scrum Master does not have to be there. One thing to experiment with is not turning up to see what happens, to see how the team react. So that would be one example. How do you make different stakeholders attend daily Scrum meetings? So the daily Scrum is only for the developers. So if loads of different stakeholders were turning up, that would be a problem. So rubbish question. What is the structure of a good story? I've answered that above. What is the role of a Scrum Master in a sprint retrospective? To take part as a Scrum team member. Outside of Scrum Utopia, they will probably be facilitating that event, but they don't have to, because of course, the Scrum Master is part of the Scrum team, so they may have some things to bring up themselves. How can Scrum Masters ensure timely delivery of action items? I'm not sure what you mean there. What action items? Things in the sprint backlog? What do you mean? What exactly do you mean by sprint in Scrum? Sprint, for probably the third time in this interview, time box period of time between 1 and 4 weeks. What does the concept of confidence vote mean in Scrum? Why is it vital? Confidence voting is not part of the Scrum guide. I mean, it's a thing. Is it vital? I mean, maybe, depending on the circumstance. I prefer dot voting, or, you know, fists of 5. I suppose it's the same thing. It's a temperature check, really. You can't put, can't write contracts with confidence votes, unfortunately. Is daily meeting suggested for all teams, irrespective of their size or experience levels? Explain. Well, all right, I think they're getting tired of these questions as well. I mean, if you're a Scrum team trying to fulfill the Scrum framework, then the daily Scrum is a daily event. It doesn't matter what their experience is. Obviously, we don't want the Scrum team to be too big in terms of people, but yeah, don't know who wrote these questions, but anyway. Can the Scrum team members participate in the product development process? If so, please explain how. Does that even warrant an answer? I'm not quite sure. Yes, Scrum team members can participate in product development. That's sort of the point. In Scrum, what do you mean by user stories? What benefits come from using them? Whoa, a bit repetitive now. What do you mean by user stories would be the question I'd be answering here, because you seem to be asking me the same questions over and over again. What are the benefits? They tell the story from the user's point of view, what they want to achieve, and why. Why aren't the user stories man-hours estimated? Well, they can be. If that works for you, then you do you. If you're trying to get me down the rabbit hole of story points, then they take hours off the table, because we know the time box, which is the sprint length to achieve a certain sprint goal. So I'm not going to fall into your trap. If you want to estimate in hours, although I think it's a waste of time, you go for it. Name some other agile frameworks. There's only Scrum, isn't there? Kanban, Crystal Clear, DSDM. Although DSDM is a methodology, not a framework, but there we are. When should you use waterfall over Scrum? When it makes sense. Would you recommend automated testing for your project? Yes. How long were your sprints? I've done 1, 2, or 3, or 4 week sprints, depending on the organization. Is it okay if someone wants to change a requirement? Yes. I would say the user's wants and needs are always going to change. I wouldn't want it to be forced upon the team, but changing requirements are welcomed in the Scrum framework and in an agile organization. What type of metrics or reports have you used? Lead time, cycle time, throughput, time to market, average lead time of impediments being solved is a personal favorite. How many Scrum teams have you managed at one time? None, because I'm not there to manage them. What type of requirements did you use for your teams? Requirements that the users want. Describe a time when your delivery team members, the language here, delivery team members, Scrum team members, what are you trying to get at? Describe a time when your delivery team members didn't seem to be getting along. How did you handle this? Get them in a room, talk to them like adults, use techniques such as radical candor, taking the emotion out of the situation, making sure that it's not focused on them, it's focused on the situation, the behavior and the impact it is having. It's not saying that they're bad people, but some of their behaviors may be causing some issues. That's done, we're done. So there we have it, 62 of the most popular Scrum Master interview questions answered to some extent. I'll let you decide to what extent. If you want the answers from the article, I will link that in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world if you liked and subscribed, and I'll see you next time.